My name is Sarah, and for as long as I can remember, I've believed in God. I grew up in a small, tight-knit church community where prayer was as natural as breathing. Every Sunday morning, my family and I would bow our heads and close our eyes, joining together in heartfelt petitions to God. As a child, I thought prayer was simple. You ask, and God answers. But as I grew older, something shifted. I prayed constantly, but the answers I hoped for never seemed to come. When I prayed for my father's health to improve, he grew weaker. When I prayed for financial relief during hard times, the bills only piled higher. It wasn't that I doubted God's existence. I couldn't imagine life without him. But I began to wonder if my prayers made any difference at all. As an adult, I tried harder to focus during prayer. I followed every piece of advice I'd ever heard, praying in the morning, finding a quiet space, even writing down my prayers. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that my words were hitting a ceiling. My mind would wander, distracted by the demands of life, and I would often find myself rushing through my prayers just to check them off my list. I didn't talk about my struggles with anyone. I couldn't. I was known in my church as a woman of strong faith, someone who always had the right verse or encouragement to share. Admitting that I felt distant from God, or worse, that I wasn't sure if prayer even worked, felt like a betrayal of everything I believed. But inside, the doubts gnawed at me. Why did prayer feel so futile? Why didn't I feel God's presence when I prayed? Was I doing it wrong? Was he even listening? These questions haunted me, and the guilt that followed only made it worse. Then came the night that changed everything. It was an ordinary evening. I was driving home from work, the soft hum of the radio keeping me company as the sun dipped below the horizon. My thoughts were scattered, as they often were, bouncing between the tasks I hadn't finished and the prayers I hadn't truly committed to that day. The intersection ahead of me was clear, or so I thought. As I started to drive through, I didn't see the truck barreling toward me from the left. There was no time to react, no time to pray. The impact was deafening, and in an instant, my world went dark. When I opened my eyes, everything felt different. There was no pain, no sound, no sense of time or space. It was as if I had stepped out of my body and into a realm I couldn't explain. Confusion washed over me, followed quickly by an overwhelming sense of fear. Where was I? What was happening? As the darkness around me grew heavier, a single thought echoed in my mind. This can't be the end. When I opened my eyes, I wasn't in my car anymore. I wasn't on the road or in a hospital. I was standing in a place I couldn't describe, a void that stretched endlessly in every direction. The air was thick and heavy, almost suffocating, and there was a deep, unsettling silence that made my skin crawl. I wasn't sure if I was breathing or if I even needed to. All I knew was that something was very, very wrong. I tried to move, but my feet wouldn't obey me. It was as if I were suspended in this place, unable to fully control my body. I looked around, desperate for any sense of direction, but the darkness was impenetrable. Then, out of nowhere, I heard it. A faint whisper, low and menacing just at the edge of my hearing. The sound sent a chill down my spine. and soon it was joined by others. The whispers grew louder, overlapping and twisting together into a cacophony of voices. "You're wasting your time," one voice sneered. "Your prayers don't matter," another hissed. "He doesn't hear you," a third voice growled, dripping with malice. The whispers felt like daggers piercing through my thoughts, each one targeting my deepest fears and doubts. My heart raced as I realized these weren't just voices. They were accusations, reminders of every moment I had questioned the power of prayer, every time I had doubted God's presence. I tried to block them out, but the more I resisted, the louder they became. Then the darkness began to shift. Shapes emerged from the shadows, twisted, grotesque forms that seemed to writhe and pulse with an unnatural energy. They weren't fully solid, more like shadows given life, but their presence was undeniable. These beings weren't just here to frighten me. They radiated an oppressive hatred, a vile intent that made me feel completely exposed. Suddenly, I realized where I was. This wasn't just some void or dream. I was standing in the middle of a battle I hadn't even known existed. These beings, these demonic entities were real, and they were focused on me. Their whispers weren't random. They were aimed directly at my weaknesses, my insecurities, and especially my doubts about prayer. As I stood frozen, one of the beings moved closer. Its form was shrouded in a sickly, shifting mist, and its voice cut through the others like a blade. "You never believed your prayers mattered," it said, a sneer curling in its tone. "And you were right. You think he listens to someone like you? Pathetic, weak." The words stung, but they also lit a spark of anger deep within me. I wanted to shout back, to defend myself, but the truth was, this being wasn't entirely wrong. I had doubted. I had questioned whether my prayers were worth anything. And now, standing here, I could see why. This wasn't just my own struggle. It was a deliberate attack, a calculated effort to weaken my faith and silence my prayers. The realization hit me like a wave. All those times I had been distracted, too tired to pray, or too doubtful to believe my prayers made a difference. They hadn't been random. They were part of this battle, part of a larger, unseen war. These beings, these forces of darkness, had been working tirelessly to keep me from praying, to keep me from connecting with God. And I had let them. As I processed this, the scene around me shifted again. The darkness peeled back, revealing what looked like a massive fortress, jagged and blackened, with spires that seemed to claw at the sky. This wasn't just any fortress. It felt alive, pulsating with a sickening energy. I could sense the evil emanating from it, a concentrated force of hatred and despair. And then I saw them. Thousands of shadowy figures scurried around the base of the fortress, each one hunched and grotesque, carrying weapons that looked more like chains and nets. These weren't ordinary tools. They were meant to entangle, to bind. I realized they were designed to trap prayers, to block them from reaching their intended destination. Above them, a swirling mass of smoke and fire hovered ominously, crackling with power. I could feel its purpose. It was feeding on fear, doubt, and despair. Every missed prayer, every half-hearted plea, every doubt-filled word seemed to strengthen it. I watched in horror as this entity grew larger, its tendrils stretching out and latching onto the fortress, reinforcing its walls. The scene overwhelmed me. This was spiritual warfare, raw and unfiltered. It wasn't just a metaphor or an idea. It was real, and it was happening all around us, all the time. I had always thought of prayer as something private, personal, but now I saw it for what it truly was. A weapon, one that these forces feared more than anything else. As I stood there, paralyzed by the weight of what I was witnessing, a thought broke through these chaos. Pray. The word was soft but insistent, like a small light in the midst of the darkness. At first, I hesitated. What could my prayer possibly do in a place like this? But the thought came again, stronger this time. Pray. With trembling hands, I closed my eyes and whispered the only words I could think of. God, help me. In an instant, the whispers stopped. The beings recoiled, their twisted forms writhing as though they had been struck. The swirling mass above the fortress flickered, its power dimming slightly. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me of the truth. Prayer had power, even in the smallest, simplest form. As the light began to grow stronger, I realized that this was only the beginning. I wasn't just here to see this battle, I was here to understand it. And with that understanding, I knew I could no longer stand on the sidelines. Prayer wasn't just a ritual, it was a weapon, and I was being called to wield it. As the darkness receded and the oppressive whispers faded, a new presence filled the space. A brilliant light appeared, radiant and warm, casting away every shadow and fear. I couldn't look directly at it. Its intensity was overwhelming, but I could feel its love and authority wrapping around me like a blanket. For the first time since the accident, I felt safe. I felt known. Kneel, a voice spoke clear and steady. It wasn't harsh or commanding, but its power was undeniable. I fell to my knees without hesitation. There was no fear, only reverence. As I bowed my head, I knew exactly who was speaking to me. Jesus. Sarah, he said, his voice filled with both kindness and strength. You've been brought here for a purpose. There are truths you must die, truths you must understand, because the battle for souls is real, and prayer is the key. Tears streamed down my face. I've failed, I whispered. I doubted. I stopped believing that my prayers mattered. Jesus stepped closer, and I felt his hand on my shoulder. The warmth of his touch flowed through me, washing away every trace of guilt and shame. You are not here because of your failures, he said. You are here to see the truth, to understand the power of prayer, and to carry that truth back with you. The light around us intensified, and suddenly I was no longer standing in the void. I was in a vast open field bathed in golden light. Before me, I saw people kneeling in prayer, their heads bowed, their hands clasped tightly. Some prayed with confidence, their voices strong and unwavering. Others whispered softly, their words barely audible, their faces filled with doubt or pain. Yet in the air above them, I saw something incredible. Each prayer, no matter how small or hesitant, became a beam of light. The strong, confident prayers shot upward like blazing arrows, piercing through the heavens. But even the weakest prayers, those whispered in fear or exhaustion, glimmered faintly and rose with persistence. Together, they created a dazzling network of light, connecting heaven and earth. Jesus gestured toward the scene. "This is what happens when my people pray," he said. "Every prayer, no matter how small, has power. It reaches me and it moves the heavens." As I watched, the beams of light began to strike the fortress I had seen earlier. The jagged walls trembled as the light struck them, cracks forming in the dark stone. The shadowy figures below recoiled, shielding themselves from the beams. I could see the impact of each prayer, no matter how faint or feeble it seemed. Every single one weakened the darkness, pushing it back inch by inch. "Even the prayers you thought were unheard," Jesus said, "were never wasted. The enemy knows the power of prayer, which is why he works so hard to discourage it. Distractions, doubts, fatigue, these are his tools, designed to keep you from using the weapon I've given you." I watched as one of the faint beams of light, barely visible, struck the base of the fortress. At first, it seemed too small to make a difference. But then, the cracks in the stone began to spread. Slowly, the entire structure started to shake, pieces of the walls crumbling away. "That prayer," Jesus said, pointing to the faint light, "was spoken by a mother who didn't believe her words would make a difference. She was tired, overwhelmed, and questioning her faith. But she prayed anyway, and her prayer has done this." Tears filled my eyes as I realized how often I had underestimated the power of prayer. I had thought my words were too weak, too small to matter. But here I was seeing the truth. Every prayer was a weapon, a force that pushed back darkness and brought God's light into the world. Jesus turned to me, his expression both serious and compassionate. "Sarah, you must understand this. The power of prayer doesn't come from you. It comes from me. When you pray, you are inviting me to work through you, to move in ways you cannot see. Even when you feel weak, your faith activates my power." As he spoke, the scene shifted again. I was now standing in what looked like a bustling city, filled with people going about their lives. Above them, I saw demonic figures darting through the air, their chains and nets aimed at capturing prayers before they could rise. Some people prayed fervently, and their prayers broke through the chains, reaching the heavens with ease. Others, distracted by their phones or consumed by worry, spoke half-hearted prayers that fizzled out quickly. But then I saw something remarkable. A young boy, no more than 7 years old, knelt beside his bed. His prayer was simple: "Jesus, please help my mom and dad." It wasn't eloquent or long, but the moment he spoke, a beam of light shot upward, breaking through every chain in its path. The demonic figures recoiled, their weapons powerless against the child's faith. Faith is the key, Jesus said. It's not about how many words you speak or how strong you feel. It's about trusting me, even in the smallest ways. That boy's prayer has changed things his family may never fully see, but it has set my plans in motion. I turned to him, my heart bursting with questions. What about the prayers that seem unanswered? I asked. What about the times when we pray and nothing seems to happen? Jesus' expression softened, and he gestured toward another scene. This time, I saw a man praying fervently, his face streaked with tears. Behind him, angels were fighting against demonic forces, their swords clashing in a fierce battle. The man couldn't see what was happening, but his prayers gave the angels strength, driving back the darkness with every word. Some battles take time, Jesus said. You may not always see the results of your prayers immediately, but they are always heard. They are always working. The light around us grew brighter, and Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder. Sarah, prayer is not just a practice. It is a partnership. It is how you invite me to move, how you bring heaven to earth. Never doubt its power, and never stop praying, no matter how you feel. As I knelt before him, overwhelmed by what I had seen, I made a vow in my heart. I would never again take prayer for granted. I would pray, not because I felt strong, but because I knew he was. And I would share this truth with anyone who would listen. Prayer changes everything. As I knelt before Jesus, bathed in the radiant light of his presence, I felt peace like I'd never known before. The weight of my doubts and failures had lifted, replaced by a deep understanding of the power of prayer. But as the calm settled over me, I sensed that this moment wasn't the end of my journey. It was only the beginning. Jesus looked at me, his expression both gentle and firm. Sarah, he said, what you have seen is not for you alone. The truth about prayer, about its power and purpose, must be shared. Many of my people are struggling as you did, distracted, discouraged, doubting that their prayers matter. You are being sent back to show them the truth. My heart raced at his words. The thought of returning to the world felt overwhelming. After witnessing the spiritual battles and the weight of prayer's importance, I wasn't sure I was strong enough for such a mission. But Jesus, in his infinite wisdom, knew my thoughts. Do not be afraid, he said, placing his hand on my shoulder. You will not be alone. My Spirit will guide you, give you strength, and remind you of what you've seen here. But the path will not be easy. The enemy will try to silence you, to sow fear and doubt, and to discourage those who hear your message. I nodded, though the weight of his words sank deep into my soul. What do I tell them, Lord? I asked. How can I help them see what you've shown me? Jesus stepped closer, and the light around us grew even brighter. Tell them that prayer is not about perfection. It's about faith. It's not about the words you speak, but the heart behind them. Even the smallest, weakest prayer can move mountains when it is spoken in faith. Help them see that I am not looking for eloquence or strength. I am looking for trust, As he spoke, images began to appear in the light. I saw a woman sitting at her kitchen table, her head in her hands as she prayed through tears. Her words were halting, filled with doubt and pain, but as they rose, they became a beam of light that pierced through the darkness. Then I saw a young man, his hands trembling as he whispered a simple prayer for forgiveness. Though he barely believed his own words, his prayer unleashed a wave of light that drove back the shadows surrounding him. Remind them, Jesus said, that their prayers are powerful even when they don't feel it. The enemy works tirelessly to convince them otherwise. He uses distractions, fatigue, and lies to keep them from praying. But when they pray, even in weakness, the darkness trembles. The scene shifted again, and I saw a group of people praying together in a small room. Their prayers intertwined, creating a tapestry of light that covered their entire city. The darkness tried to push back, but the collective power of their faith was unstoppable. Encourage my people to pray together, Jesus said. There is great power when believers unite in prayer. Teach them to lift each other up, to stand together against the enemy's schemes. I looked at him, overwhelmed by the enormity of what he was asking. But what if they don't listen? I asked. What if they're too discouraged or distracted to believe me? His eyes softened, and he smiled. That is not for you to carry, Sarah. Your job is to speak the truth and live it out. The rest is in my hands. Remember, you are not responsible for changing hearts. That is my work. You are simply my vessel. The light around us shifted once more, and I saw myself standing before a crowd, sharing my story. At first, the faces in the crowd were skeptical, their expressions guarded. But as I spoke, their eyes began to soften, and I saw tears streaming down their faces. The truth was reaching them, breaking through their barriers of doubt and fear. Some will listen, Jesus said, and others will reject you. But every seed you plant matters. Even if you never see the fruit, trust that your obedience will bear results in my time. I felt a renewed sense of purpose rising within me. This wasn't about me or my abilities. It was about Him and His power working through me. My fears began to fade as I realized that I didn't need to have all the answers. I only needed to trust Him and take the first step. Jesus extended His hand, and I felt His love and strength pour into me. When you return, He said, remember these truths. Pray without ceasing, even when it feels futile. Encourage others to pray, even when they feel weak. And trust in my power, even when you cannot see the results. The battle is real, but the victory is already mine. Tears streamed down my face as I nodded. I'll do it, I said, my voice trembling but resolute. I'll share what you've shown me. I'll help others see the power of prayer. Jesus smiled, and the light around us began to pulse gently, as though it were alive with His joy. Go, Sarah, He said. Your mission begins now. The light grew brighter, and I felt myself being pulled away. The warmth of His presence remained with me, but the brilliance of the light began to fade. I opened my eyes to the sound of beeping monitors and hushed voices. I was back in my body, lying in a hospital bed. The nurses and doctors were startled to see me awake. and the look on their faces told me that my survival was nothing short of a miracle. My body was weak, but my spirit felt stronger than ever. I knew why I had been given a second chance, and I couldn't wait to begin the mission Jesus had entrusted to me. In the days that followed, I began to share my story. At first, it was with close friends and family, many of whom struggled to understand or believe what I was saying. But I didn't let their skepticism discourage me. I prayed for them, trusting that the seeds I was planting would take root in time. As I shared my testimony more widely, I saw the impact of Jesus' truth. People who had all but given up on prayer began to pray again, even in the smallest ways. Communities started gathering for prayer meetings, lifting each other up, and standing together in faith. The darkness didn't go away. It fought back harder than ever, but the light of prayer continued to grow, driving back the shadows bit by bit. Every day I wake up with a renewed sense of purpose. I am not perfect, and there are still moments when I feel weak or uncertain. But I hold on to the truths Jesus revealed to me. Prayer is powerful. Faith moves mountains. And even the smallest whisper can change the world. This is my mission now, to remind the world of the weapon they hold and to help them see that no prayer is ever wasted. It's not about our strength or our words. It's about His power. And that truth will carry me for the rest of my life. When I left the hospital, my body was frail, but my spirit felt alive in a way it never had before. Every breath, every moment felt like a gift, a second chance to live with purpose. I knew I couldn't waste it. Jesus had entrusted me with a mission, and I was determined to fulfill it, no matter the cost. The first time I shared my story, my hands trembled and my voice wavered. I stood in front of a small group at my church, unsure of how they would respond. I told them about the accident, the void, and the overwhelming darkness. I described the moment I cried out to God and how Jesus revealed the spiritual battle that rages over prayer. I told them about the light, the power of even the simplest prayer, and how every word spoken in faith pushes back the darkness. The room was silent when I finished. I could see the questions in their eyes, the doubt, the wonder, and the flicker of hope. After a long pause, an older woman raised her hand. "Do you really believe my prayers matter?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Even when I feel like I don't have the right words?" I nodded, tears filling my eyes. "Your prayers are more powerful than you realize. It's not about the words you say or how strong you feel. It's about trusting God to hear you. Even the weakest prayer, spoken in faith, shakes the foundations of darkness." From that moment, something shifted. People began to approach me, sharing their own struggles with prayer. Some admitted they had stopped praying altogether, convinced it didn't make a difference. Others confessed that they only prayed out of habit, their words empty and routine. But as I shared the truths Jesus had shown me, I saw a spark reignite in their hearts. They began to pray again, not out of obligation, but out of a renewed belief in the power of their words. Not everyone welcomed my story. There were those who dismissed it as a dream or a product of my imagination. Some accused me of exaggerating or questioned my understanding of prayer. At first, The skepticism hurt. I wanted so desperately for everyone to believe, to see the truth as I had seen it. But then I remembered Jesus' words. You are not responsible for changing hearts. That is my work. You are simply my vessel. Those words became my anchor. I realized that my job wasn't to convince or argue. It was to share, to plant seeds, and to trust God with the results. And as I did, I began to see the fruit of obedience. One by one, lives started to change. A mother who had given up on praying for her rebellious son began lifting him up in faith every morning, and within weeks, their relationship began to heal. A young man struggling with addiction found the courage to pray for strength, and slowly, he began to break free from the chains that bound him. A small group of believers started gathering weekly to pray for their community, and soon, they saw breakthroughs in ways they hadn't thought possible. The impact wasn't always immediate or dramatic, but it was undeniable. Each story, each transformation reminded me that the battle wasn't mine to fight. It was God's. My role was simply to encourage others to step into the fight with the most powerful weapon they had, prayer. Even in the face of challenges, I've found joy and peace in this mission. My own prayer life has been transformed. I no longer approach God with a checklist or try to force the perfect words. Instead, I come to Him as I am weak, flawed, and sometimes unsure, but always trusting in His grace. I've learned to pray without ceasing, lifting up even the smallest concerns and trusting that He hears me. To anyone hearing my story, I want to leave you with this. Your prayers matter, whether they are long or short, eloquent or stumbling. They have the power to move mountains. Don't let doubt, distractions, or fear keep you silent. When you pray, you are partnering with God, inviting Him to work in ways you may never fully see. Every prayer, no matter how small, is a light in the darkness. The battle is real, but so is the victory, and it begins with you. On your knees, lifting your voice in faith. The enemy will try to tell you that your prayers don't matter, that they're too weak or too late. But remember this: even the faintest whisper, spoken in faith, reaches the heart of God and unleashes His power in the spiritual realm. So pray. Pray when you're strong, and pray when you're weak. Pray when you feel full of faith, and pray when doubt creeps in. Just pray, because every word you speak in faith is heard, and it makes a difference. This is the truth that changed my life, and it's the truth I pray will change yours.